The latest poll numbers from Abacus Data continue to paint a bleak picture for the Trudeau Liberals. Since the firm's last release, Conservative support is up 3%. And in terms of percentages, take a look at where things stand right now. Conservatives at 43%, Liberals at 24%, New Democrats 18%, and the Bloc at 8%. So for more, we're now joined by David Coletto, the founder, chair, and the CEO of Abacus Data. David, good to see you. Thank you for joining us.
Good to see you, Michael. Thanks for having me.
So we opened there with the national numbers, but really I want to focus in on the regions where the Trudeau government essentially has built their victories in the past elections, because there the party's also trailing. In Atlantic Canada, for example, Conservatives lead by 18%. In Ontario, Conservatives lead by 14%. Let's start in those two regions specifically. What's being said about the Prime Minister and his party? Where does the dissatisfaction lie?
Well, I think it's all around inflation and the cost of living. I think, Atlantic Canada is best. I think it shows up really in some opposition to the carbon tax, which took effect, last summer and has really been a political hot potato for the Liberals in that region. In a region that, remember, in 2015, they won every single seat when they first were elected. Today, with these kind of numbers, they'd be lucky to hold, half a dozen. So it really does show the kind of reaction that Atlantic Canadians have had. In Ontario, I think it's the same kind of forces. It's housing, it's the cost of living. There's some concern about healthcare, but all in all, it's a shift away from the Liberals largely. I think reflective of both a desire for change and the economic and social context that's just making people a little grumpy these days, as the Prime Minister said a few weeks ago.
So Atlantic Canada, Ontario, not great for the Liberals, especially since they certainly have carried those two regions in the last couple of votes or so. Let's talk about Quebec, because the Bloc Québécois, they lead by 8% right now. The Liberals and Tories are in a statistical tie. So I'm wondering, who does that tie actually benefit more?
Well, the Liberals still would benefit. They typically have a more efficient vote because their vote is much more concentrated, for example, around Montreal. So that kind of number would still give them more seats than the Conservatives. But I think it's an indication that I don't think they could take their support in Quebec for granted either. That even in that region where the Prime Minister's from and where they think they've got this solid core of support, that maybe the efforts that the Conservatives have made to, chip away at the Bloc Québécois, link the Bloc with the Liberals is paying some dividends. Even François Legault, who only a few months ago was, untouchable, is now trailing provincially. I think it shows that Quebecers too are responding to the same forces that the rest of the country are, and that are those that I talked about, the cost of living, and other concerns around healthcare as well.
Yeah, and beyond regions, you also recently noted a decline in Liberal support when it comes to younger Canadians. Why is that? Where is that support now going?
Well, it's going to the Conservatives, and the New Democrats are benefiting to some extent. I think it's one of the biggest the most interesting parts of the story is, if I told you, Michael, a year ago that the Liberals were more popular among those over 60 than they are among those under 30, you should have said to me, David, go and do another survey. That data makes no sense. But we have now seen consistently, not just our polls, but others, showing the Liberals actually weakest among that youngest cohort. And I think it's related to a few things. One is, again, housing. This is the group of Canadians who are most feeling under pressure, whether it's because of rents increasing, whether it's that dream of home ownership that feels farther away than ever, as well as in some ways, concerns around climate change not being acted upon by the Liberals. I mean, their decision to carve out the carbon tax, while maybe politically helpful for them in Atlantic Canada, was a signal to those who care deeply about this issue that maybe they aren't as principled on it as they say. So I think it's a real challenge for the Liberals, and I think is a demonstration of just how quickly and significantly the political environment has shifted under their feet.
Okay, so trailing nationally, trailing in the regions where Liberals need to be leading in order to be reelected, trailing amongst young voters. But despite all this, you also note that with the Conservative lead, what we're not seeing right now is this sense of Poilievre mania. What do you mean by that? What kind of opening, if any, does that present to the other political parties?
Yeah, I mean, when we ask Canadians how they feel about Mr. Poilievre, for example, he's doing okay. He's got about equal numbers who say they have a positive and negative view of him, which is better than past conservative leaders. So you need to give him some credit. But I think most of the reason that the Conservatives are so far ahead right now is much more about rejection of the Liberals than an embrace of Mr. Poilievre and the Conservatives, which means that they still have work to do to convince people that they're ready for government. Now, that may not be, they may not have to, simply by being so unhappy with the Liberals, that might just push people into their arms. But I think they can't become complacent and think that just because people want change, that they aren't still going to evaluate whether the change alternatives, the options that are out there, are acceptable. And there's about 1 in 3 Canadians who say they want change but aren't completely comfortable with the alternatives. As I've said before, they're going to likely decide the next election, and they're still watching carefully, maybe not paying deep attention to everything that's going on in Ottawa right now. But when the time comes, Pierre Poilievre needs to be ready and demonstrate he's ready for prime time.
David Coletto, I always appreciate the time. Thank you for this.
Thanks, Michael.